The knock didn't sound like a visitor. It sounded like a verdict. 3 hard raps echoed through the Marlowe mansion's front hall, rolling up the marble staircase and into the quiet wing where 2 small beds sat beneath matching nightlights. Outside, the morning was pale and cold, the kind of winter light that makes even gold look tired. Inside, everything smelled like lemon polish and old roses, like the staff had scrubbed the grief into the walls and hoped it would disappear. I'm Carlos Vieira. I'm a journalist by trade, and I've learned that power has its own language. It whispers through contracts, it clears its throat in boardrooms. It knocks like this when it believes the door belongs to it. Ethan Marlowe stood in the foyer barefoot, a billionaire in a soft grey sweater that hung on him as if it belonged to someone happier. His eyes were fixed on the ironwork of the front doors, on the frosted glass that blurred the shapes outside into silhouettes. He wasn't looking at people. He was looking at the idea of people. He was looking at what they could take. Behind him, the mansion waited, massive and gleaming, like a cathedral built for a family that had stopped praying. "Sir?" The house manager, Mrs. Dallow, murmured near the dining room archway. Her hands were clasped tight, knuckles white. "Should I—" Ethan lifted one hand without turning. A signal, a refusal, a plea disguised as control. The knock came again. Then a voice, calm and practiced, threaded through the door. "Mr. Marlowe, Family Court Compliance Unit. We have an order." Ethan's throat moved, his jaw tightened, and for a second, just a second, I saw the man beneath the money, a father trying to keep a world from changing while it was already changing anyway. He opened the door. A woman stood on the steps in a navy coat, holding a folder so thick it could have been a weapon if the world allowed paper to be sharp. Beside her was a man with a tablet and a neutral face. Behind them, a uniformed officer remained at the gate, not inside, not threatening, but present enough to turn fear into something physical. "Ethan Marlowe," the woman said, not a question, a label. "Yes, I'm Ms. Harker. This is Mr. Lynn. We are here pursuant to a court order regarding the welfare of Noah and Lucas Marlowe." The names floated in the air like fragile things. Noah and Lucas, 9 years old, twins, both born with Down syndrome, and both built of the kind of raw honesty that makes adults either soften or harden. Noah was the quiet one, the observer, the child who spoke with his eyes and his hands, who drew his feelings because words sometimes arrived late and heavy. Lucas was the expressive one, the sunlight, the boy who laughed so loud you could hear it in the garden and cried so openly it made you want to apologize for whatever you'd done to the world. They were the heart of the mansion, and now the court was at the door. "We received reports," Ms. Harker continued, "that the current living environment may not be adequate." "Inadequate," Ethan repeated. The word tasted bitter in his mouth, like metal. Mr. Lynn glanced at his tablet. "Concerns include isolation, emotional neglect, inconsistent therapeutic follow-through, and the suitability of the property for minors, given the size, security protocols, and staffing turnover." Staff turnover. That was true. In the last year alone, I'd watched people leave this house like they were escaping a storm. Some quit quietly, some quit crying. Grief does that. It makes even paid loyalty feel like drowning. Ethan's voice lowered. "My sons are safe." "We're not here to debate," Ms. Harker said gently, and somehow that gentleness made it worse. "We're here to conduct a welfare assessment today. If the assessment indicates immediate concerns, temporary placement may be recommended, while the court reviews further." Temporary placement. The phrase landed like a crack in glass. From the hallway behind us, a soft patter of feet. Then, a breathy, excited whisper. "Dad!" Lucas appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes with one fist, his hair sticking up like he'd fought his pillow and won. He wore dinosaur pajamas and a crooked grin that faded the moment he saw strangers. His face shifted, open and unguarded, and he stepped closer to Ethan like his body already understood the shape of danger, even if his mind didn't. Noah followed a step behind, quieter, holding a sketchbook against his chest, the way some children hold stuffed animals. He didn't ask questions. He watched. His gaze moved from the folder to Ethan's face to my own, then down to the woman's shoes, as if even shoes could reveal intentions. Ethan's shoulders lifted like he was trying to make himself bigger. "Boys, go back." Lucas didn't move. He looked at the folder, then at the strangers, then at Ethan. "Are we in trouble?" "No," Ethan said too quickly. No, buddy. It's just grown-up paperwork. Noah took Ethan's sleeve between two fingers and squeezed once. A silent anchor. Ms. Harker's eyes softened. Hello, Noah. Hello, Lucas. We're just here to make sure you're doing okay. Lucas's lower lip trembled, and he covered it with a smile that didn't fit. We're okay, he said, voice cracking. We have pancakes sometimes. A child trying to prove worthiness with pancakes. I watched Ethan's face flinch, like Lucas had accidentally stepped on a bruise. Mr. Marlowe, Ms. Harker said, we need to come inside. Ethan stared at the gate officer, then at the folder, then at the boys. His hand tightened into a fist at his side. He looked like a man who had bought skyscrapers, who could move markets with a sentence, and yet here he was, being moved by people who didn't even raise their voices. That was the institutional villain, I realized, not a single cruel person. A system that could separate a family with calm language and official seals. Ethan stepped aside. The air inside the mansion shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. The foyer was grand, marble floors that held cold like memory, a chandelier that glittered like a frozen waterfall, portraits that watched from walls with eyes too alive. Elena's portrait was there, her smile elegant and gentle, her perfume still faintly clinging to the frame as if the wood had absorbed her essence. Lucas glanced up at the portrait, then back down and whispered, Mum's watching. Noah's eyes lingered on it longer. He swallowed. Then very gently, he pressed his palm to the wall beneath the portrait like he was touching her shadow. Ethan didn't look at the portrait at all. He guided the officials toward the sitting room, a space that used to glow with laughter and now felt like a showroom for quiet. Cream sofas, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in weeks, a grand piano no one played anymore. As they walked, the mansion showed itself in flashes. The formal dining room with its long table set too perfectly for meals that never happened, the library with shelves like dark waves, the sunroom where Elena used to drink tea and plan garden parties. Every room felt like a witness. Mrs. Dallow hovered near the doorway, tense as wire. And then, from the back hall, a woman rushed in, breathless, hair pulled into a simple knot, eyes bright with urgency. Grace Holloway. She wasn't staff in the traditional sense. She was a caregiver, yes, but also something else. A quiet force that had entered this mansion months ago and somehow made the air feel less haunted. Grace had a face that carried both exhaustion and kindness, like someone who had cried in private and then come out smiling anyway. Her hands were always busy, straightening a blanket, wiping a counter, smoothing a child's hair, small acts of love that didn't ask permission. Ethan had hired her after the third nanny quit. Not because she had a fancy resume, though she did have experience. She'd once been a paralegal before life broke her plans apart. He hired her because she looked at Noah and Lucas like they were whole people, not problems to manage. Grace froze when she saw the officials. Her eyes snapped to Ethan's face, reading the fear he tried to hide. What's happening? She asked softly. Ethan's voice was tight. Court assessment. Grace's mouth parted, then closed. She inhaled slow and steady, like she was holding a storm inside her ribs. Okay, she said, but her eyes said, this can't be happening. Ms. Harker glanced at Grace. You are? Grace Holloway, she replied. I'm their caregiver. Mr. Lynn nodded. We'll need to speak with you as well. Grace stepped closer to Ethan, not touching him but near enough to lend strength. And as she did, Lucas slipped his hand into hers without thinking. A ritual. It had started on Grace's first day. She'd been sitting on the floor of the twins' wing, surrounded by toy cars and crayons, when Lucas had reached for her hand like a lifeline. Grace had squeezed back twice. Tap, tap. And Lucas had giggled like the world had suddenly made sense. Noah had watched. Then later, when Grace handed him a pencil, she'd tapped it twice against the table. Noah had responded with a small nod, the closest thing he gave to trust. Tap, tap. Their private language. Now Lucas squeezed Grace's hand with the same two taps, fast and frightened. Grace squeezed back. Tap, tap. I'm here. Noah didn't take her hand, but he shifted closer to her side, sketchbook still pressed to his chest. His eyes flicked to Grace's face, and she gave him the smallest nod. He exhaled, a sound so quiet you'd miss it if you didn't know how to listen. The officials began their questions in the sitting room. Their voices were polite, their notes meticulous. They asked about school schedules, therapy attendance, social interaction, emotional support. They asked about Ethan's travel. They asked about staff turnover. They asked about the boys' adjustment since their mother's passing. Eleanor's death was always described like that. Passing, as if she'd simply walked through a door and forgotten to come back. Ethan answered like a man defending a fortress. Grace answered like a woman defending children, but the system didn't care about intention. Chad cared about boxes, and grief rarely fits into boxes. When Miss Harker asked to see the twins' wing, Ethan hesitated. That wing was sacred, painted in soft blues and greens, filled with sensory toys, weighted blankets, art supplies, small lamps that cast warm circles of light. It was the only part of the mansion that still felt like childhood. They walked down the hall, the carpet muffled footsteps, making everything feel like a dream you couldn't wake from. The air smelled like crayons and lavender, Grace's doing. On the wall, Noah's drawings were framed, birds, houses, faces with big eyes and gentle smiles. Lucas's artwork was louder, bright swirls, hearts, stick-figure family portraits where everyone held hands. Mr. Lin paused at one of Lucas's drawings. It showed a tall man with a sad mouth, two small boys holding his legs, and a woman drawn in lighter color above them, floating. "Who is this?" Mr. Lin asked, tapping the floating figure. Lucas answered instantly, voice small. "Mom, she's up there." "And how do you feel about Mom being up there?" Lucas blinked, confusion and pain mixing. Then he did what he always did when he couldn't hold the feeling inside. He spoke the truth. "I miss her all the way down here." Ethan's face tightened. Grace's eyes shimmered. Mr. Lin typed something. I watched Noah's gaze sharpen at the sound of typing. He didn't like the click of judgment. He stepped to his desk, opened his sketchbook and began to draw fast, as if putting lines on paper could keep the world from writing its own story. Grace crouched beside him. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just breathe with me." Noah's shoulders rose and fell. He drew a door, a big door with a lock. Behind it, a heart. I felt the hairs on my arms lift, because Noah had been drawing doors lately, always doors. And in a mansion full of rooms, a door means one thing: something is hidden. The officials moved through the wing, noting safety measures, noting space, noting routines. Everything looked perfect, because Grace had made it perfect. But perfection can look suspicious to a system trained to find flaws. By late afternoon, the assessment ended. Ms. Harker closed her folder with a soft thud that sounded final. Mr. Lin tucked his tablet under his arm. They stood once more in the foyer beneath Elena's portrait. "Mr. Marlowe," Ms. Harker said, "the court will review today's findings. You will be notified of next steps. In the meantime, I advise you to increase outside support, family counseling, consistent therapeutic documentation, community engagement." Ethan nodded stiffly. "Fine." Ms. Harker paused, then added, "There is one more matter. We have received a motion requesting temporary placement pending review. It has not been granted yet, but it's on the docket." Lucas gasped. Noah's pencil froze mid-line. Ethan's voice dropped into something dangerous. "Who filed that motion?" Ms. Harker's eyes flickered. Just a flicker. The guardian ad litem's office. A guardian appointed to represent the children's best interests. The best interests, as defined by strangers. Grace's hand tightened around Lucas's. "When will the court decide?" she asked, voice steady but strained. "Soon," Ms. Harker said. "Be prepared." Soon. The word that makes fear bloom. After they left, the front door closed and the mansion exhaled. But the relief didn't come. The silence felt heavier than before, like the house was holding its breath for the next knock. Lucas turned to Ethan, eyes wide and wet. "Dad, are we going away?" Ethan looked at his son, looked at the tears on his cheeks, the trembling mouth trying to stay brave. And for the first time that day, Ethan's mask cracked. He knelt. Right there on the marble floor beneath Elena's portrait, Ethan Marlowe, who owned islands, who funded hospitals, who could buy almost anything, lowered himself to his child's height and wrapped his arms around Lucas like he was the only thing that mattered. "No," he whispered fiercely. "No, I won't let anyone take you. I promise." Lucas pressed his face into Ethan's shoulder and sobbed, open and unashamed. Noah stood behind them, quiet, watching, sketchbook pressed to his chest like armor. Then he stepped forward and placed one hand on Ethan's back, the smallest touch, but it carried a weight I couldn't name. Grace stood a few feet away, one hand over her own heart, Her eyes flicked to Elena's portrait, and in that glance I saw something like a question. "What did you leave behind, Elena? What did you know?" Ethan looked up at Grace, desperation sharpening his voice. "Fix this," he said, not as an order, as a broken man asking for help because his money suddenly felt useless. Grace swallowed. Her throat bobbed. "I'll do everything I can," she whispered, "but we need truth. We need proof, and we need it fast." Noah lifted his sketchbook and turned it toward Grace. The drawing of the door, the lock, the heart. Grace stared at it, her breath catching. Then she looked down the hall, toward the mansion's deeper rooms, toward the places grief had sealed shut. And that's when I understood. The court wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the spark. Because somewhere in this house, Elena had left something that could save her sons, or destroy the last fragile pieces of their family. And Noah, quiet, observant Noah, had been trying to show us the door the whole time. Grace's eyes locked on the shadowed corridor, and she whispered, "Noah, where is that door?" That night, the Marlowe mansion felt like a ship in fog. Every hallway, a corridor of uncertainty, every room holding secrets behind polished surfaces. The staff moved softly, as if loud steps could trigger the court's return. The garden outside was black and still, the fountain silent under a thin skin of winter air. In the twins' wing, Grace sat on the floor between Noah's bed and Lucas's bed, her back against the wall, a small lamp casting warm light that made everything feel safer than it was. Lucas curled under his blanket, hugging a stuffed fox. Noah lay on his side, sketchbook open, pencil resting in his hand like a thought he hadn't finished. Ethan had tried to read them a story earlier. He'd stumbled over the pages, voice breaking at random words. When he reached the line where the mother bear kissed her cubs goodnight, he couldn't keep going. He'd closed the book and walked out without explanation. Grace had heard him in the hallway afterward, breathing like someone trying not to fall apart. Now in the quiet, Lucas whispered, "Grace? I'm here," she whispered back. "Will they make us go to the other place?" Grace's chest tightened. She could have lied. She could have said never. But Lucas didn't need fantasy. He needed safety and truth. "They're trying," she said softly. "But trying doesn't mean they win." Noah's pencil moved again. He drew a small figure standing beside a large one. Then he drew 2 taps, 2 little marks like footsteps. Grace smiled faintly. "Tap, tap," she whispered. Noah didn't look up, but he slid the pencil across the page twice. Tap, tap. Lucas's face softened. He held out his hand from under the blanket, and Grace reached for it, squeezing twice. Tap, tap. Their ritual wasn't magic. It wasn't a cure, it was a bridge, built from consistency, kindness, and the simple promise of presence. Grace's phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. She glanced at it and saw a message from her grandmother. "Did you eat? Don't forget your psalm before bed. God is close to the broken-hearted." Grace swallowed. Her grandmother's faith had been the only roof over Grace's head when life caved in. When Grace's mother died young, when her father vanished into addiction, when law school dreams died under unpaid bills, her grandmother had held her with prayer and stubborn love. Now her grandmother was ill. Nothing dramatic, nothing sensational, just the slow, heavy reality of aging and medical bills that didn't care about dignity. Grace took this job because she needed money, but she stayed because she'd started to love these boys like family. And love is expensive, not in dollars, in courage. She tucked the phone away and leaned closer to Noah. "Can you show me the door you keep drawing?" she asked gently. "Not with words, with your way." Noah's eyes flicked to her face, cautious. Then he sat up, pushed his blanket aside and slid off the bed. He didn't rush. Noah never rushed. He moved like he was listening to something deeper than sound. Lucas popped up too, suddenly energized by purpose. "Adventure," he whispered too loudly, then clamped a hand over his mouth and giggled. Grace raised a finger to her lips, smiling despite the fear in her belly. "Quiet adventure," she whispered. Noah led them out of the wing, down the hall lined with family photos that had stopped updating after Elena's death. The mansion's lights were dimmed, leaving pools of amber glow that made shadows look like people. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something floral, Elena's perfume still lingering in certain corners, like the house refused to forget her. They passed the library. Noah paused there, eyes narrowing. He stepped inside. The library was one of the mansion's most alive rooms. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, leather chairs, a rolling ladder, the faint scent of old paper. Ethan used to work here late at night, surrounded by books he didn't read, pretending the presence of knowledge could replace the absence of his wife. Noah walked to the far wall where a portrait of Eleanor hung in the library too, Eleanor younger, laughing, holding a book. Beneath it was a small side table with a vase of dried roses. Noah lifted his hand and tapped the wall beneath the portrait twice. Tap, tap. Grace frowned. Here. Noah nodded once. Lucas leaned in, eyes wide. It's a secret wall, he whispered, thrilled and scared at the same time. Grace's mind raced. The mansion had been renovated multiple times. Secret compartments weren't impossible. Wealthy families hid things. Sometimes it was harmless, old love letters, valuables. Sometimes it was evidence. Grace reached for the vase, moved it carefully, and noticed faint scratches on the table's edge like something had been slid in and out many times. Her pulse quickened. She ran her fingers along the molding beneath the portrait. There, one panel felt slightly loose. She pressed gently and a soft click answered. A narrow section of the bookshelf shifted. Lucas clapped a hand over his mouth to stop himself from squealing. Noah's eyes didn't widen. They softened, like he'd finally been understood. Grace pulled the panel open just enough to see a slim space behind it, lined with velvet. Inside sat a small metal box no bigger than a book, and beside it, a key taped to the wall with yellowing tape. Grace's breath caught. Oh my! Noah pointed at the key, then at Grace, then at his own heart. His meaning was clear. This is important. Grace carefully took the key and the box, closing the panel again, as if she'd never been there. Her hands trembled. Not from fear of getting caught, though that was real, but from the weight of what she might be holding. They returned to the twins' wing and sat on the floor again. Lucas bounced with nervous energy. Open it! Open it! Open! Shh! Grace whispered, but her lips twitched. Noah placed his palm on the box, grounding it. Grace inserted the key. It turned smoothly. The lid lifted with a soft, metallic sigh. Inside was a letter, an envelope, thick, sealed with wax, Eleanor's initial pressed into it. Grace's throat tightened so hard it hurt. Ethan's footsteps appeared in the hall, slow, heavy. Grace quickly closed the box, but the envelope remained in her hand like a flame. Ethan entered, his eyes tired, his hair damp as if he'd washed his face and failed to wash off the day. He looked at the boys first. You okay? Lucas nodded too fast. Noah stared at the envelope in Grace's hand. Ethan's gaze followed Noah's. His face changed when he saw the wax seal. Color drained from him. Where did you get that? He asked, voice rough. Grace hesitated, then told the truth. Noah showed me. Ethan stepped closer as if the envelope could bite him. He reached out, then pulled his hand back, fingers curling. That's Elena's seal. Noah held up his sketchbook and pointed to the door drawing, then to the envelope. He looked at Ethan, eyes fierce in their quiet way, like he was saying, Mom left this. You have to see it. Ethan's breath trembled. I can't, he started. Grace looked up at him. Ethan, the court might take your sons. If Elena left something that can help, we don't have time for you to avoid pain. The words were bold, maybe too bold. In the months Grace had been here, she'd learned that Ethan's grief was a locked room. Pushed too hard and it slammed shut. But tonight fear had already cracked the lock. Ethan's eyes flicked to Lucas, who was watching him with fragile hope. Then to Noah, who stood unnaturally still as if moving might break the moment. Ethan swallowed. Open it, he whispered. Grace broke the seal. The letter inside was folded neatly, Elena's handwriting looping across the page like music. Grace began to read aloud because Ethan's hands were shaking too much to hold it. My love, the letter began, if you are reading this, it means you are scared, and that means the system has arrived, the one I tried to prepare you for. Ethan's face turned to stone. Grace continued, her voice trembling as Elena's words filled the room. Elena wrote about a guardianship clause she'd fought to include in their trust, a protective measure meant to keep the boys with Ethan, but only if certain conditions were met. She wrote that after her death there would be people, lawyers, advisors, well-intentioned professionals, who would claim the mansion was too isolating, too large, too controlled, too strange. She wrote that they'd push for temporary placement, not because the boys were unsafe, but because control was easier when children were removed from the center of their own story. Grace's stomach twisted. It was like Elena had predicted this exact knock. The letter instructed Ethan to find a second envelope hidden elsewhere in the house, one that contained documentation, proof of consistent care plans, and most importantly, a recorded message addressed to the guardian ad litem's office. Eleanor believed the system would listen more to her voice than to Ethan's grief. But the letter also held a warning. There is someone inside the trust structure who benefits from separating you from the boys. Not one person, a network, a machine. Ethan's lips parted. "This is insane," he whispered, but his eyes were glossy. Grace didn't let him retreat. "Eleanor knew," she said softly. She knew something was coming. Lucas leaned against Grace, suddenly tired. "Mom knew we'd be scared," he whispered. Noah touched the letter with 2 fingers like it was sacred. Ethan sank onto the edge of Noah's bed, his shoulders collapsing. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, voice cracking. "Why didn't she tell me she thought this could happen?" Grace heard the real question under it. Why didn't she tell me before she left me alone? She didn't answer because there was no answer that would heal him. Instead, she said, "We find the second envelope." Ethan looked up at her, his grief sharpening into something else. Purpose, maybe. "Where?" Grace glanced at Noah. "Noah." Noah closed his sketchbook, stood, and walked to his dresser. He pulled out a drawer, reached beneath the lining, and drew out a small wooden box. He opened it and removed a single item. Elena's old silk scarf, folded carefully, still carrying faint perfume. Noah held the scarf out to Ethan. Ethan flinched, as if touched. He took it slowly, pressing it to his face for half a second before he could stop himself. His eyes closed. His breath hitched. Then he lowered it, staring at Noah like his son had just handed him a piece of heaven. Noah pointed to the scarf, then pointed down the hall toward the sunroom. Grace's heart pounded. The sunroom? Noah nodded. The sunroom was Elena's space. Bright glass walls, hanging plants, a chaise lounge where she'd read and planned and dreamed. After her death, Ethan had locked it. No one went in. It was the museum of what he couldn't bear. Grace stood. "We go now." Ethan's voice was low. "It's locked." Grace's eyes met his. "Then we unlock it." The next morning brought no peace. A formal email arrived from the guardian ad litem's office requesting additional documentation within 48 hours. 48 hours to prove a father's love in a format that could be filed. Ethan paced the kitchen, the huge space smelling of coffee and fresh bread that no one touched. His phone rang constantly. Lawyers, advisors, investors who didn't matter. His hands trembled when he tried to drink water. Grace watched him and realized something terrifying. Ethan had the power to buy solutions, but not the skills to navigate a system designed to distrust emotion. And Grace, once a paralegal, once someone who knew how courts worked, had the skills, but not the power. Unless she used what Elena left behind. That evening, when the boys were in their pajamas again, Grace stood in the hallway outside the locked sunroom with Ethan beside her. The door was white, elegant, and silent, like it was holding its own breath. A small keyhole glinted under the light. Ethan's hand hovered near the knob. "I can't," he whispered. Grace felt the moment, the power reversal trying to begin. A billionaire afraid of a door. "You can," she said softly. "Not for you. For them." Noah stood behind Ethan, holding his sketchbook. Lucas stood beside Grace, clutching her sleeve. Ethan's shoulders shook. He lowered himself, slow, heavy. And then, in the quiet hallway, Ethan Marlowe knelt. He looked up at Grace like a man stripped of every illusion of control. "Help me," he whispered. "Please, I don't know how to do this without her." Grace's eyes burned. She nodded. "Then we do it together." She placed her hand over his on the knob. Tap, tap. Lucas squeezed her sleeve. Tap, tap. Grace squeezed back, then turned the knob. The sunroom door opened. A rush of air carried Elena's scent, gardenia and clean linen, so strong Ethan gasped like he'd been punched. Light from the moon spilled through the glass walls, painting the plants silver. Dust motes floated like tiny ghosts, and on the chaise lounge, neatly placed, was a sealed envelope with Elena's handwriting on the front. "For the day the court comes." Grace's knees went weak. Because Elena hadn't just predicted the knock. She'd been waiting for it. Ethan reached for the envelope with shaking fingers, and behind them the mansion's security system chimed, announcing a new visitor at the gate. The security chime sounded soft, almost polite, but it turned every muscle in Ethan's body into stone. Grace froze in the sunroom doorway, Elena's envelope cold in her hand. The twins stood behind them, suddenly alert, like their bodies remembered yesterday's fear even if their minds wanted to forget. Mrs. Dallow's voice came through the intercom, strained. "Mr. Marlowe, there's a car at the gate. It's another court vehicle." Ethan's face drained. "Already?" Grace looked down at the envelope. "For the day the court comes." Elena hadn't just left instructions. She'd left timing, like she knew the system would press harder once it smelled weakness. "Get the boys to their wing," Grace whispered to Mrs. Dallow. "Now, calmly." She turned to Lucas and Noah, forcing her voice into warmth. "Hey, you two, can you help me with something important? I need your strongest superhero walk back to your room." Lucas straightened instantly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand like he could erase fear. "Superhero," he whispered proudly, and took Noah's hand. Noah didn't resist. He glanced at the envelope, then at Grace, then down the hall toward the foyer. He lifted his sketchbook and flipped to a page where he'd drawn a small heart inside a circle. Under it were 2 dots. Tap, tap. Their promise. Grace tapped her fingers against her thigh twice where Noah could see. Tap, tap. Noah nodded and walked with Lucas, slow and steady, back toward the wing. The mansion swallowed their footsteps. Grace and Ethan moved to the foyer. Through the frosted glass, another silhouette. Another folder. Another calm face. When Ethan opened the door, a man in a charcoal coat stood there, younger than Ms. Harker. Different department, same certainty. "Mr. Marlowe," he said, "I'm Mr. Sennett from the Guardian ad litem's office. I'm here to serve notice of an emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mr. Sennett held out papers. "The court will consider temporary placement pending further review. You may present evidence of stability, support systems, and ongoing care plans." Grace stepped forward. "We received the documentation request. We're preparing." Mr. Sennett's gaze flicked to her. "And you are?" "Grace Holloway, caregiver." He nodded as if cataloguing her. "Caregivers can be replaced. Systems prefer structures that outlast individuals." The cruelty of the sentence wasn't loud. It was bureaucratic. That's what made it dangerous. Ethan's voice shook. "My sons aren't objects." "So of course not," Mr. Sennett replied, polite. "But the court's priority is welfare. Large estates can be complicated environments for children." He glanced past Ethan into the mansion's gleaming foyer like he was already imagining it without the boys. Grace felt anger flare hot and sharp. She had known systems like this, the kind that smiles while it dismantles you. Mr. Sennett turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. An independent evaluator will visit early tomorrow to assess the boy's emotional state. Any resistance will be noted." Resistance, like love, could be a form of non-compliance. After he left, Ethan shut the door slowly. His forehead pressed against the wood, and for a moment he looked like he might slide down to the floor. Grace opened Elena's envelope with careful hands. Inside were 3 things: a USB drive, a binder of meticulously organized documentation, therapy notes, school reports, routines, staff training logs, and a handwritten note addressed to Ethan. Grace handed the note to him. "Read it." Ethan's fingers trembled as he unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page, and the lines on his face deepened with each word. He whispered, She built a case." Grace's voice caught. "Elena knew you'd be too broken to fight paperwork with grief." Ethan looked at her sharply, wounded. Then his expression collapsed. She was right. Grace flipped through the binder. It was thorough. So thorough it felt like Elena had been preparing for a trial long before she died. The USB drive was labeled, for the court, for the boys, for the truth. Grace set it on the table like it was fragile. "We need to play it." Ethan hesitated. What if it's her voice? Grace's chest tightened. Then it might be the thing that saves them. They went to the library. The room smelled of leather and dust and the faint sweetness of old paper. Grace plugged the USB into a laptop Ethan barely knew how to use. She clicked the file. A video opened. Eleanor appeared on screen, seated in the sunroom in daylight, plants behind her. Hair styled simply, eyes bright with a sadness that looked like foresight. Her voice came through the speakers, warm and steady. "If you're watching this," Elena said, "then the court has entered our home." Ethan made a sound that wasn't a sob yet, just a breath that broke. Eleanor continued, speaking directly as if she could see Ethan in this moment. as if she could reach through time and grab his hand. "I want you to listen to me, Ethan. Not as a businessman, not as a man who thinks money can solve pain. As a father, our boys are not fragile because of their diagnosis. They are fragile because the world assumes fragility and then builds cages around it." Grace's eyes filled. Eleanor explained the trust clause she'd fought for, that Noah and Lucas must remain in their established home environment unless a clear danger existed. She emphasized that grief, isolation, and estate size were not danger. She spoke about the importance of consistent caregivers, routines, sensory safe spaces, and above all, emotional security. Then her expression sharpened. "There is an entity within our trust administration that benefits if Noah and Lucas are removed," Elena said. "Not one person, a structure, a chain of incentives. If they are placed temporarily, the trust can be managed for their protection in ways that remove Ethan's direct control. That's the plan, and it will be executed politely." Ethan's face contorted. "Who?" he whispered. Eleanor answered without naming names. She didn't have to. She described patterns, sudden court motions, staff manipulation, documentation gaps exaggerated into neglect, a narrative built that the mansion is a cold institution instead of a home. Grace's mind raced. "We need to identify the trust administrator," she murmured. "We need to see who has authority to trigger those clauses." Ethan stood abruptly. "My lawyers—" Grace turned to him, voice firm. "Your lawyers are part of the machine, Ethan. Maybe not malicious, but they live in it. Helena didn't leave this to them, she left it to you." Ethan's eyes flashed. "I don't know how." Grace swallowed hard, her own fear rising. She'd once known how. She'd once thrived in legal language. But after her mother's death, after her father disappeared, she'd dropped out of law school and taken job after job to keep her grandmother afloat. She hadn't wanted to go near courtrooms again because they reminded her of everything she couldn't fix. Now, the courtroom was coming anyway. That night, Grace sat alone in the twins' wing, the binder open in her lap, documents spread like a battlefield. The boys slept at last, their breaths soft and steady, their nightlights casting gentle glows. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan paced like a caged animal. Grace's phone buzzed again. Her grandmother's voice came through in a voicemail, quiet and tired. "Baby, I prayed for you today. Remember, fear is loud, but it's not the boss. Breathe. You're not alone." Grace held the phone to her chest, eyes closed. She didn't want to cry, crying cost time, but tears came anyway, hot and silent. Her internal thoughts crowded in. What if I fail? What if I miss a deadline, forget a file, say the wrong word, and the system takes them? "I'm just a caregiver, I'm replaceable," they said. But these boys, they're not replaceable. And Ethan, he's drowning. And Eleanor trusted someone to carry this, and somehow it landed on me. Grace whispered a prayer under her breath. Not polished, not perfect, just raw. "God, give me clarity, give me courage. Don't let the wrong people win." A soft shuffle. Noah stood in the doorway, hair messy, eyes sleepy but focused. He walked to Grace and sat beside her without being asked. He looked at the papers, then at Grace's face. Grace forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep?" Noah shook his head once. Then he picked up a pencil and drew on a blank page from his sketchbook. He drew a scale, the symbol of justice. On one side he drew two small stick figures holding hands. On the other side he drew a stack of papers. The papers were heavier. Grace's breath caught. "You're right," she whispered. "The papers are heavy." Noah looked at her, eyes steady. And then he did something rare. He spoke. Not a full sentence. Noah didn't always choose words, but a phrase, carefully formed, like he'd carried it a long time. "Help. Us. Stay." Grace's heart shattered and reassembled at the same time. She nodded, tears spilling now. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." Noah tapped the paper twice. Tap, tap. Then he leaned his head against Grace's shoulder, trusting her with the weight of his fear. The next morning, the mansion woke before sunrise. The kitchen lights glowed warm against the darkness outside. The smell of toast and cinnamon tried to pretend this was a normal day. Ethan wore a suit that looked like armor. Grace wore a simple dress and a cardigan, her hair neat, her hands steady even though her stomach churned. The independent evaluator arrived at 7, a woman with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke to the boys briefly, asked questions about routines, feelings, safety. Grace stayed near, not interfering, just present. Lucas answered with honesty, offering pieces of his heart, like he didn't know how to protect himself from being misunderstood. When the evaluator asked, "Do you feel lonely in this big house?" Lucas paused, then said, "Sometimes the house is too quiet, but Grace makes it loud in a good way, and Noah makes pictures, and Dad tries." Dad tries. The most devastating sentence a child can say because it means trying isn't the same as being there. Ethan's jaw clenched. Noah didn't answer questions directly. Instead, he handed the evaluator a drawing, a house with 2 windows shaped like eyes, watching over 2 small figures. Underneath, he'd written in shaky letters, "Home." The evaluator nodded politely and made notes. After she left, Ethan turned to Grace, voice harsh with panic. "What if they twist everything?" Grace looked at him. "Then we make the truth louder than their twist." At noon, they left for the courthouse. The sky was grey, threatening rain. The drive was silent except for Lucas humming softly, a tune Eleanor used to hum while brushing their hair. Noah watched the world through the window, sketchbook on his lap, drawing the courthouse steps as they approached like he was trying to understand the place that could decide his life. The courthouse was a different kind of mansion, cold marble, fluorescent lights, security lines, the smell of disinfectant and paper. People moved quickly, eyes down, as if humanity was inconvenient here. Grace held Lucas's hand. Noah walked close to her side. Ethan walked ahead, shoulders stiff, face controlled but his eyes wild. The hearing began in a small courtroom that felt too small for the size of the decision. A judge sat elevated, calm, unreadable. The guardian ad litem representative spoke in careful language about best interests, structure, community integration. They referenced staff turnover, Ethan's travel, emotional inconsistency. They painted the mansion as a gilded cage. Grace listened, fury rising, but she waited. She wasn't there to react. She was there to win. When it was their turn, Ethan stood. His voice started strong, rehearsed. Then it wavered. Then it broke. "I love my sons," he said, too simply. Like love should be enough. The judge's expression didn't change. The system didn't care about simple love, it cared about evidence. Grace stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "we have documentation prepared by Mrs. Elena Marlowe prior to her passing. It addresses precisely these concerns, including the care routines, support structures, and the risks of unnecessary placement." She handed the binder to the clerk. Then she held up the USB drive. "And we have a recorded statement from Mrs. Marlowe intended for this scenario." A murmur moved through the room. The judge nodded. "Play it." Grace's fingers trembled as she plugged it into the court system. Elena's face appeared on a monitor, larger than life, calm and certain. Her voice filled the courtroom, and as Elena spoke, Ethan's mask finally crumbled. Tears slipped down his face silently, unstoppable. He didn't wipe them. He just listened, like a thirsty man drinking water. Elena's words weren't dramatic. They were precise. They were a mother's love translated into the system's language. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, "did you know your wife prepared this?" Ethan swallowed. "No," he whispered, "but I believe her. And I failed to be prepared." Grace felt the air shift. The judge's eyes moved to the boys, to Lucas's trembling lip, to Noah's steady gaze. Then, like a blade wrapped in velvet, the guardian ad litem rep spoke again. "Your Honor, even with this documentation, the question remains, is the Marlowe mansion emotionally appropriate? It may be safe, but is it nurturing?" Grace's stomach tightened. That question could swallow them whole, because emotional appropriateness is subjective, and systems love subjectivity when they want control. The judge turned to Ethan and said, "If I order temporary placement, what will you do?" Ethan stared at the judge, as if she'd asked him to choose which lung he wanted to breathe with. The courtroom felt suddenly too bright, too quiet. Grace heard the hum of the fluorescent lights, like a warning. Lucas's small fingers squeezed hers so tightly, her knuckles ached. Noah's eyes stayed on Ethan, unblinking, as if Noah was trying to send strength through sheer focus. "If you order it," Ethan said slowly, voice shaking, I'll appeal. I'll hire the best." The judge held up a hand. "That's not what I asked. I asked what you will do for your sons." Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His billionaire instincts wanted to answer with strategy, power, money. But the judge wasn't asking for tactics. She was asking for humanity. Grace felt Ethan's panic spiral. She recognized it, the freeze that comes when grief meets a problem it can't pay off. So Grace stepped closer, just a half step, and whispered, barely audible, "Tell the truth, not the resume." Ethan's eyes flicked to her, desperate. Then he looked down at Lucas and Noah. Lucas's face was wet with silent tears. Noah's lips were pressed together, tight, holding something inside. Ethan's voice broke like wood under pressure. "I will change," he said. "I will stop hiding behind work. I will learn what they need, not what I think they need. I will show up." The judge studied him. The guardian ad litem rep exhaled, almost amused. "Promises are easy, Your Honor." Grace felt anger flash, but she held it. She needed one thing. The system's own logic turned against it. "Your Honor," Grace said, "the motion for placement is based on speculation of emotional inadequacy, not evidence of danger. The evaluator's notes do not indicate harm. The school reports show progress. The therapy logs show consistency. If the court's concern is support structure, we can expand support without removal." The judge's gaze narrowed. "And what do you propose?" Grace's mind raced. She remembered Eleanor's warning. Not one person, a network, a machine. The machine would keep pushing until it got what it wanted. The only way to stop it was to make its incentive visible. "We request," Grace said, "an audit of trust administration decisions tied to guardianship triggers. Mrs. Marlowe's statement references structural incentives. If those incentives exist, they create conflict of interest in recommendations." The guardian ad litem rep stiffened. "That's—" The judge cut them off. "It's a serious allegation." Grace met her eyes. "It's a serious situation." The judge leaned back, silent for a moment. Then she spoke. "I will not order immediate placement today. However, I am ordering increased oversight and expanded support services. Mr. Marlowe, you will comply with scheduled family counseling and weekly documentation. Ms. Holloway, you will coordinate with court services for the next 60 days. And I am requesting the trust administration records relevant to guardianship motions." A breath escaped the room, relief, but fragile. Lucas let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. Grace pulled him close. Noah didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes for a second, then opened them like someone who had survived a wave and was scanning for the next one. The judge's gavel tapped once. "This matter is not concluded. It is paused." Paused. The kind of pause that can still end badly if you stop moving. Outside the courthouse, winter rain finally fell, light at first, then steady, soaking the steps and turning the world gray. Ethan stood under the awning, looking up at the sky like he wanted to ask Elena why. Grace ushered the boys into the car with Mrs. Dallow, who'd come along trembling but determined. Then Grace turned back to Ethan. "We bought time," she said. Ethan's face was hollow. "Time doesn't feel like a win." "It's a chance," Grace replied, "and chances are sacred." Ethan stared at her, eyes raw. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice low. "You could leave. You could find another job." Grace thought of her grandmother's medical bills, of her own exhausted body, of the safe choice. Then she thought of Noah's whispered words. "Help us stay," she answered honestly. "Because someone should have fought like this for me when I was 9, she whispered, "and because these boys deserve a home that doesn't have to prove itself every time a stranger knocks." Ethan's throat worked. He nodded once like he couldn't trust himself to speak. Back at the mansion, the rain made the gardens shimmer. The driveway lights reflected in puddles like small moons. Inside, the house smelled of whetstone and coffee. The staff moved carefully, as if any sudden movement might trigger disaster. Over the next weeks, the mansion transformed, not because Ethan bought new furniture or added security, but because Ethan began to live in it again. He attended counseling. He showed up to school meetings. He learned the twins' routines, what sounds overwhelmed them, what textures calmed them, what jokes made Lucas laugh, what quiet gestures made Noah feel safe. He sat on the floor in the twins' wing and let them teach him how to play on their level. And Grace became the bridge between love and paperwork. She organized logs, coordinated therapists, tracked routines, documented progress. She spoke the system's language without letting it steal the family's soul. Still, the machine kept moving. A letter arrived from the trust administration, politely challenging the judge's request for records. Another letter suggested alternative placements to support the family. Always polite, always helpful, always pushing the same direction. Grace began to suspect what Elena had warned. The trust structure had a motive. She dug deeper, using her old paralegal instincts. She requested statements, reviewed amendments, traced signatures. Late at night in the library, she pored over documents while the mansion slept. One evening, she found it. A clause buried in the trust. If Noah and Lucas were removed from the primary residence for more than 30 days, certain assets would transfer to a protective management entity for child welfare optimization. A third-party company contracted to manage estates for minors' benefit, a company that charged massive fees, a machine that profited from separation. Grace felt nausea rise. Elena had known. Grace printed the page and sat staring at it, heart pounding. This wasn't a villain with a sneer. This was legal language designed to look like protection while draining control from a father and stability from children. She needed to show Ethan. But before she could, the mansion's security chime sounded again. Not a court car this time. A sleek black vehicle. A man in a suit with a briefcase. A representative from the trust administration. Grace met him in the foyer. The mansion's marble floors gleamed beneath the chandelier, Elena's portrait watching silently. The man smiled like a customer service agent. "Ms. Holloway," he said, "I'm here to help. The trust board is concerned about the stress this is putting on the children. We'd like to offer a temporary supportive placement option, just for a short period, to ease the burden." Grace's stomach tightened. "We have a court plan. We are compliant." "Of course," he said smoothly. "But you know how these cases go. The court could still decide placement later. If you choose a supportive option now, it looks cooperative. It strengthens your position." It was persuasion dressed as kindness. Grace heard Elena's voice in her head, executed politely. Ethan entered the foyer, his face hard. "What is this?" The man's smile didn't falter. "Mr. Marlowe, we're offering support. A short-term program with trained professionals. Routine, structure, community integration." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're offering to take my sons." "To protect them," the man said, "and to protect you from the court." Grace held the printed trust clause behind her back, like a blade she hadn't drawn yet. Ethan's fists clenched. "Get out of my house." The man raised his hand, still calm. "You can refuse, but refusal will be noted by the trust board as non-cooperation. It could—" Grace stepped forward. "Could what?" she asked quietly. "Could trigger the clause that transfers control to your management entity." The man's smile flickered for the first time. Grace brought the paper forward and held it up. "This clause, this incentive, this is why you want placement. It's not about welfare. It's about profit." Ethan stared at the paper, his face changing as understanding detonated inside him. He looked at the man, then at Elena's portrait, then at Grace. The man recovered quickly. "That clause is standard." Grace's voice sharpened. "Standard doesn't mean ethical." The man's eyes cooled. "Be careful, Ms. Holloway. You're staff. You're not counsel." Grace's heart hammered, but she didn't back down. "And you're not family." Ethan's voice went low, dangerous. "Leave." The man's smile returned, thinner now. "As you wish. But remember, systems don't like being challenged." After he left, Ethan stood still, staring at the clause. His breath came shallow. Grace watched him, waiting for anger, for denial, for the old billionaire instinct to throw money at it. Instead, Ethan's knees buckled. He sank down on the marble floor right there in the foyer, beneath Eleanor's portrait, like his body couldn't hold the weight of betrayal and grief at the same time. He looked up at Grace, eyes red, voice broken. "I almost let them," he whispered. "I almost cooperated, because I was scared." Grace crouched down, staying at his level. "You didn't," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't because you were here." His voice cracked into something humbler, raw. "Grace, please, tell me what to do. Tell me how to fight this without losing them. I'm begging you." The power reversal wasn't theatrical. It was real. A billionaire kneeling in his own foyer, asking a caregiver for guidance like she was the only light left. Grace's eyes burned. "We fight with truth," she whispered. "We show the judge the incentive. We expose the conflict. We turn the machine's logic against it." A small voice came from the hallway. "No, go." Noah stood there, clutching his sketchbook, eyes fierce. His words were simple, but they landed like thunder. Lucas appeared beside him, face crumpled with fear and anger. "Stop taking our home," he whispered, voice shaking. "We're not boxes. We're boys." Grace's heart clenched. Ethan turned to his sons, tears spilling now. He crawled a step on the marble, until he could reach them, until he could wrap his arms around both of them at once. "I'm sorry," he whispered into their hair. "I'm sorry I wasn't here enough. I'm here now. I'm here now." Noah didn't cry. He lifted his sketchbook and showed Ethan a new drawing, the mansion with eyes, watching. But this time, the two small figures stood in the doorway with a tall figure behind them. And above a lighter figure, Elena, was drawn not floating away but leaning toward them, hands outstretched like she was still protecting. Grace looked at the drawing and felt a cold certainty. Elena's secret wasn't just paperwork, it was a map for survival, and the system was going to hate that. Grace whispered, "Tomorrow we go back to court, and this time we're not just defending the mansion, we're exposing the machine." The next court date arrived like a storm you could see from miles away. Grace wore the same cardigan, but her spine felt different, straighter, steadier. She carried the trust clause, the documentation, and a prepared statement that framed the issue in the only language institutions truly respect: conflict of interest. Ethan didn't look like armor anymore. He looked like a father. His suit was the same, but he held Lucas's backpack in one hand and Noah's sketchbook in the other, as if he'd finally understood what mattered. In the car, Lucas hummed again, quieter this time. Noah watched the rain slide down the window, then pressed his fingertip against the glass and traced a heart. Grace tapped her fingers twice on her knee. Tap, tap. Noah responded by tapping his sketchbook twice. Tap, tap. At the courthouse, the air smelled of wet coats and old paper. The same fluorescent hum, the same marble coldness. But this time, Grace didn't feel small. She felt clear. Inside the courtroom, the Trust Board's counsel was present. Smooth suit, polished smile, carrying the confidence of someone used to winning quietly. The guardian ad litem rep sat poised, ready to frame love as instability again. When the hearing began, Grace spoke first. "Your Honor," she said, "we are here because a narrative has been created, that the Marlowe mansion is emotionally inappropriate. That narrative has been pushed in parallel with trust administration pressure for temporary placement. We have identified a financial incentive clause that would transfer control of substantial assets to a third-party management entity if the children are removed from their residence beyond a set period." The room shifted. Even the judge's eyes sharpened. Grace continued, steady. "This creates a conflict of interest in recommendations that appear child-centered, but may benefit administrative structures. We ask the court to consider that any placement suggestion coming from entities tied to this clause is compromised." The Trust Counsel rose, smile still in place. "Your Honor, this is an overreach. The clause is standard protective language designed to ensure minors' assets are managed responsibly." Grace didn't flinch. Standard protective language doesn't require separating children from their father to activate, and it doesn't require pressuring a caregiver with statements like, "Systems don't like being challenged." The counsel's smile faltered. The judge leaned forward. "Did someone say that?" Grace met her gaze. "Yes, Your Honor. In the Marlowe foyer, under the guise of offering support." The guardian ad litem rep tried to pivot. "Regardless of clauses, the question remains, are the children thriving emotionally?" Ethan stood. This time his voice didn't chase perfection. It carried truth. "I haven't been thriving," he said. "I have been surviving. I thought survival was enough. But my sons, they deserve more than that." He glanced down at Noah and Lucas. "I lost my wife, and I let grief turn my home into a museum. I let silence become routine. I didn't hit them. I didn't abandon them. But I wasn't fully there. And that is on me." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "I'm changing. Not because the court told me to. Because my sons showed me what absence feels like. Lucas told you I try. Noah asked me to help them stay. They don't need a different house. They need their father." The courtroom held its breath. The judge's gaze softened slightly. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, "why should this court trust that change will last?" Ethan looked at Grace, then back to the judge. And then, something happened that I will never forget. because it stripped Ethan Marlowe of every illusion of control and left only a man who loved his children. He walked forward and knelt, not in front of his sons this time, but in front of the bench, not as a performance, not as manipulation, just raw surrender. A billionaire on his knees in a room built to judge. "I don't ask you to trust my power," he whispered. "I ask you to trust my willingness to become the father they deserve. And if you need proof, let my life be it. Give me the chance." Grace's throat burned. Lucas gasped softly, eyes wide. Noah stared, stunned, as if seeing his father's heart outside his body for the first time. The judge sat very still. Then she spoke, her voice firm, grounded. "This court does not remove children for grief," she said. "We remove children for danger. The evidence presented does not support danger. It supports a family in pain that is taking measurable steps toward stability." The Trust Council's jaw tightened. The judge continued, "Furthermore, conflict of interest concerns regarding trust administration clauses are serious. I am ordering an independent review of the trust's relevant provisions and halting any administrative actions that would incentivize separation. Any further placement motions will be met with scrutiny." Relief didn't arrive like fireworks. It arrived like breath returning after being held too long. Lucas began to cry, silent and shaking, and then he laughed through it, wiping his face with his sleeve. "We stay?" he whispered. Grace crouched beside him, smiling with wet eyes. "We stay." Noah didn't cry. He stepped forward and held out his sketchbook to Ethan. Ethan took it carefully like it was sacred. On the page was a new drawing, a heart with sound waves around it. Ethan frowned softly. "What is this?" Noah looked up at him, eyes steady, and spoke in a clear, quiet voice that made the room feel suddenly holy. "Dad, I can hear your heart. It wasn't literal. It wasn't medical. It was emotional truth. Noah's way of saying, 'I feel you now. I know you're here.'" Ethan's face crumpled. He pulled Noah into his arms and held him, rocking slightly, as if he could soothe 9 years of fear in one embrace. Lucas wrapped himself around them too, creating a knot of family that no folder could untie. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but lighter at the edges. Back at the mansion, the foyer felt different. The chandelier still glittered. The marble still held cold. But the air held something new: movement, life, the possibility of laughter returning to rooms that had forgotten it. Ethan didn't go to the library first. He went straight to the twins' wing. He sat on the floor with them, and Grace watched as he let them lead. Lucas made him wear a toy crown. Noah handed him a crayon and guided his hand slowly, showing him how to draw a simple bird. Ethan's bird was terrible. Lucas laughed so loud the staff smiled in the hallway. Noah's eyes softened with something like pride. Later, in the sunroom, Grace stood alone for a moment. She looked at the plants, the chaise lounge, the way Elena's presence lingered like warmth in sunlight. She felt a strange gratitude toward a woman she'd never truly known. Ethan entered quietly. "Grace," he said. She turned. He held an envelope. "Eleanor left one more letter," he said, voice gentle. "It was in the same box. It's for you." Grace's breath caught. "For me?" Ethan nodded and handed it over. Grace opened it with trembling hands and read silently. Eleanor's handwriting flowed like calm water. Elena thanked Grace for being the kind of person who notices quiet children. She admitted she'd asked Mrs. Dallow to keep an eye out for someone like Grace, someone with legal understanding and a caregiver's heart. Eleanor wrote that she couldn't bear the thought of the boys being handled like paperwork, and she wanted someone in the house who could translate love into evidence without losing the love. Grace's tears fell freely now. At the end, Eleanor wrote, "And when you save them, let Ethan save you too. Don't carry your own burdens alone. That is how the machine wins." Grace pressed the letter to her chest. Ethan's voice was rough. "You did save them," he said. "I did not know how, and you stood in the fire." Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. I did what was right." Ethan's eyes held hers. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Not as your employer, as a man who owes you more than gratitude." Grace hesitated. Then she told the truth. "My grandmother," she whispered. "She's sick. The bills are crushing us." Ethan nodded immediately, but his voice stayed careful, respectful. "Then we help her," he said, "with your consent, in a way that keeps her dignity. You don't owe me your story to deserve that." Grace covered her mouth, sobbing softly. Not because of money, because of the shift. Because Ethan wasn't trying to purchase her loyalty. He was trying to honor her humanity. The mansion's gardens bloomed again as weeks passed. Not with magic, but with attention. Ethan began to walk outside with the boys. Lucas loved the fountain, splashing his fingers in it, laughing. Noah loved the greenhouse, watching leaves unfurl, drawing them with careful lines. Grace kept documenting, but the paperwork felt less like a cage now and more like a shield. The system still existed, still capable of knocking again, but the family was no longer alone inside it. One evening in the foyer beneath Elena's portrait, Lucas tugged Ethan's sleeve and whispered, "Dad?" "Yes, buddy." Lucas looked up at his mother's smile in the portrait, then back at Ethan. "If Mom's watching, tell her we stayed." Ethan's eyes filled. He nodded. "We stayed," he whispered. Noah stepped closer and placed his hand on Ethan's arm. Steady, grounding. Then he tapped twice. Tap, tap. Ethan swallowed and tapped back, awkward at first, then sure. Tap, tap. Grace stood behind them, hand over her heart, feeling the ritual become something larger than fear, a language of belonging. And now, before I leave you with this story, I want to ask you something, because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They hold up a mirror. How many families are judged by systems that don't know their hearts? How many children are treated like files instead of lives? And if you were in Ethan's place, if your home, your grief, your love was being questioned by strangers, what would you change first? Your defenses or your presence? If this story moved you, take a second to like the video, subscribe for more emotional stories from the Marlowe Family Edition, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other. Love is real and it's worth fighting for. So I'll leave you with the question Noah answered in his own way. Can the people you love hear your heart, even when you don't say a word?